Welcome to our RaboResearch Food and Ag Reports on Brownfield. I'm anchor reporter Meghan Grebner, and with us is Don Close, Senior Animal Protein Analyst with Rabo. Good afternoon.
Hi, Meghan. How are you?
I'm great. We're going to talk a little beef outlook for 2019. To get things started, let's talk a little production and price forecast for next year. Okay.
We've been spending a lot of time on that one. Where we're at for a final number, we're looking for beef production in 19 to be up 3%. We're looking for pork production to be up 5% and broiler production to be up 3%. So we're looking at huge increases in total available protein for the year, a lot more price competition, available supply and price competition between the species. I have, in the work that I've done on that, I've still got beef exports growing at a very aggressive pace. And I did that as much as anything just to pull down that domestic supply and try to keep that per capita consumption from being just totally unrealistic with the supplies that we're going to have on hand. So a lot of meat and probably price pressure because of it.
As we talk about, and we'll talk a little bit more about global supply as well, but can we talk a little domestic supply and domestic demand specifically as it relates to the economy? Because we've seen a lot of jobs added, we've seen consumer confidence jump. How does that play into where all of this protein is going?
I think for the short term, on the very short term, with the election being tomorrow, probably be some added info as where things are going, just knowing where we're going to set with how the House and Senate fall. With the increases or the status of the overall economy, I think in the short term, certainly the unemployment rate where it is today, under 4%, expectations it will likely decline some more. Consumer spending numbers are encouraging. So those, the Dow, a lot of volatility, but still at very attractive levels. And I think those indicators are still very good. If you look at deeper into the economy, if you look at where we spend a lot of time looking at the bell curve and short-term rates to long-term rates and the fallout that we have had historically, if those interest rates invert where short-term rates get equal to or above long-term rates, that has an incredibly high reliability of leading to recession 6 to 18 months after that inversion of the bell curve. So I think there's some red flags showing up. The other things that I'm spending quite a bit of time looking at, if you look at the sale of hard durables, and specifically I'm talking about car sales and I'm talking about existing home sales, both of those measurements are starting to slow down. So I'm going to leave it like this. I think, short term we could see some more bloom in the economy, but as we go forward, I just think we're seeing enough red flags to suggest that the economy is probably as good as it's going to get.
As we talk about looking ahead to next year, what are some other things that we're taking into consideration as we look at the livestock sector in general and how it can perform over the next year?
One thing to start that conversation specifically on beef, if I look at heifers as a percentage of the numbers of cattle on feed, if I look at heifers as a percent of fed slaughter, even if I look at cows as a percent of total slaughter, all of those metrics, I still have to argue that we're expanding the cow herd. While it's at a very, very slow pace, but I think we will still see a bigger total cattle inventory number on Jan 1 as what we've seen in 2018. As far as, okay, so, and we also know from calf crop number that we will have 2.5% larger calf supply from the 2018 calf crop as cattle we worked through in 2019. So On total inventory numbers, Jan 1, I think we'll see a little bit of increase, but nominal. Beef production, I've already said we're looking for it to be up 3. So let's just say we're at that crest of this expansion. With that, if that timeline's correct, as total production and the product of the additional cows calving, we're still looking at increased production, certainly for 2019 and very likely into 2020. So we're still expanding total supply.
How does weather come into play with that? I know we saw some dry conditions in Missouri and Texas again. Does that come into play as well?
I think it applies twofold. And certainly it was weather-induced liquidation that we saw an escalated volume of beef cow slaughter throughout the summer, and had it really accelerated this discussion of, are we still expanding or not? If you look at the improvement in weather that we have had, certainly through the mid-plains, Missouri, those drought constraints have been alleviated. Still leaves us very short on hay supply in areas, but it does ease that concern of extremely dry weather. We've still got right there in the Four Corners area, obviously still got a tremendous amount of drought pressure. And then California has seen some really solid improvement in conditions out there. So overall, in our cow areas, I think we're in better shape. Canada, Western Canada, and across the whole row of border area, Canada's under a lot of drought, and I think it will cause some complications up there as we go into 2019. So that's one to really watch there. So the backside of this of the weather, I'm going to say on the cow calf areas, overall it's improved with some areas still under a great deal of pressure. The other complication, though, from the weather is, as we talk more and more about being in an El Nino year and the wet winter conditions that are typically associated with that, with the rains we've had in the Panhandle area, the rain in Kansas, and then through Nebraska, it has led to some incredibly muddy feed yard conditions awfully early in the year. And the guys are concerned that if it's this wet this early, they never have the opportunity to see those pens dry out. It could be a long, tough winter before they totally freeze up, in the case of Nebraska, northern Kansas. So if those wet conditions prevail, we could see a drag on production, just the additional energy it takes to keep those cattle fed, the energy they're using, it is detrimental to weight gains, that we could see lighter average live weights and lighter carcass weights first and second quarter because of the poor pen conditions.
Don, as we take a look and we talk 2019, we're talking global protein production. You talked about competition within the protein. So with this big expansion in poultry, or those big numbers expected next year in poultry, how does that play into all of that when it comes to pricing?
The quick answer is it's going to mean a lot more competition. What's really the driver of concern with broilers, we've got 7 new poultry processing facilities that are under some level of construction, and they'll be coming online. So to think that, if you have a new facility, you have to start servicing debt on that loan, and you have technology built into a new facility that the existing structures don't have. So you're going to go, they're going to operate those new facilities. So with anything, if the 3% I think is a realistic number to start with, but because of the new production facilities that will be coming on stream, it wouldn't be out of question to see broiler production above that 3%. Where we're at today and the strength of the economy that we've already talked about, this in 2018 and going into 19, hands down, beef has been the winner. You know, we've seen continued growth in market share. We've seen phenomenal demand and growth, particularly in the high-end middle meat market. And that will continue as long as the economy stays strong. If we start to see weakness in the economy, probably going to give a better position to the broilers on just the cost structure. We're hearing lots and lots of pressure, and particularly on boneless, skinless breast meat currently. That's just domestically there's an oversupply, and that's causing added price pressure on broilers compared to the other red meats.
Don, I think we have to talk about the elephant in the room, which which has been the African swine fever situation in China and in other parts of the globe. We know that there are trade concerns or trade problems with China. How does this potentially come into play when we look at the fact that it seems like the country doesn't have the outbreak under control, and they're not only the world's biggest supplier or producer of pork, they're also the biggest consumer of pork. So how does that all come into play when we look at U.S. pork producers?
If you take the U.S. and Chinese relationship right now, the strain we have on trade, it certainly takes leverage away from China's position when they have to, will be looking at importing the quantities of pork that could develop. So that's an interesting dynamic in itself. What clearly, again, because of trade relationships, they're going to be looking to acquire pork from Europe first, additional supplies of pork from Brazil second. So the U.S., as far as preference of suppliers to China, we're going to be in third place right now. We've tried, and when we talk the disease by itself, you know, there were additional cases in China, additional provinces that it was discovered in just this weekend. So we're up to 14 different provinces now that they have active cases of ASF in play. Clearly, that story has been taken over by the Chinese government media. We know of individual independent reporters that have been jailed on trying to report on that story as China's trying to get a handle on it. So our views are that probably the number of cases and the severity of that situation in China is worse than the news we're really getting. We're trying to keep it in perspective, and we don't want to come across as screaming fire in a crowded theater. But potentially, we're looking at the most damaging animal health crisis we have seen globally, or certainly in modern times. To put that in some perspective, if China, and we're using these for the percentage of hogs that China liquidated to get control of blue ear PRRS disease, and very different. There are vaccines available for PRRS. It's a rapidly transitioning virus. It's airborne, so it spreads really quickly and changes in time. AFS is not an airborne virus, but also there's no vaccines. The only means to get this disease under control is isolation and eradication. So with the PRRS deal, they liquidated between 5 and 10% of their hog supply to get it under control. So if we use those benchmarks, if they liquidated and their inventory of hogs estimated to be roughly 433 million, if they liquidate 5% of that inventory to get it under control, that would be an equivalent of all of U.S. pork exports. If they eradicated 10% of their inventory, it would be better than 2/3 of all global pork exports. And the talk of industry folks is they could end up eradicating 25% of that inventory to get this disease under control. So the demand that puts, as I said early on, not just on pork, but what that will mean for beef demand globally, what it will mean for broiler demand globally, it could be incredibly incredible. So here's where we sit. We've got a really bearish scenario with the escalation on domestic supplies that calls for conventional risk management. There's just no way around it. At the same time, we've got this gigantic unknown on the bullish side of the equation of just how bad will this disease get in 2019. And I think where we'll be, Meghan, is whichever one of those two stories makes the headlines on any given day, that's how the market will trade. And as a result of that, I think we could be looking at a year with incredible market volatility.
And I would assume that's why we're also seeing two different stories when it comes to the futures market and the reality then of what is the cash market here in the U.S.
Absolutely true. Now, as you talk with some of the people in the professionals in the pork field, they have the impression it's not necessarily a matter of if we get that disease in the United States, but when we get that disease. Now, I'm not in any way prepared to talk about that, and I think there's already very aggressive steps in play to prevent that from happening. But why even bring it up? If the day that would happen, we're taking what is an incredibly bullish story and turning it into an incredibly bearish story that we would essentially, at least temporarily, lose all of our pork exports, very similar to what we did with the BSE event in the cattle. So we have the 22 to 24% of domestic pork production that's exported, and we would wake up one morning and it's all staying on shore. We'd have a supply of meat we couldn't readily work around. So that's a big fear factor.
Does that also incorporate then animal health and biosecurity as an additional risk management tool for producers here in the U.S.?
I think it certainly ratchets up the level of importance. I don't know if it adds a new risk factor to producers because it's always there. But as far as preventative practices, it certainly moves that animal health risk to the forefront where it's not always the case.
As we wrap up today, looking ahead to 2019, just a quick wrap up and overview of some of the things maybe that we're just keeping an eye out for as we expect and roll into the new year.
Yep. Certainly the production levels, say at least as we finish out the year and certainly start the year, all indications are domestic demand for product will stay very good. So that will at least give us a good start to the year. Then as this production, what do we see for weather? How muddy will pen conditions be? Will pen conditions keep a limit on average carcass weights on cattle? That will be a factor. I'd say of all of the things that we've talked about today, the one thing that we didn't talk about was we finished the year with corn stocks of roughly 1.8 billion bushels. We're conversations that we will see corn acres in 2019 increase something between 3 and 4 million acres, offsetting the reduced bean acres. So I think with any kind of normal weather whatsoever, the least of our concerns is we should be looking at ample to excess feed supplies for the next several years, that at least that's not in the equation as well.
Don, it's always a pleasure to see you and to speak with you. We appreciate your time this afternoon.
Meghan, it's always good to talk to you. See ya.
I'm Meghan Grebner on Brownfield.